Hello, hello. Welcome to Clustered Chaos, where we talk about crime and mysteries pertaining to groups and the mentalities behind it. I'm Maya.
I'm Zach.
Welcome. All right, today we will be discussing the Dyatlov Pass. Are you excited?
I am excited.
We're so excited. So this tale involves nine experienced hikers in their ill-fated journey into the Russian wilderness at the peak of the Cold War. Remember this. This story remains today as one of the 20th century's greatest unsolved mysteries, as their bodies were found in unexplainable circumstances. This case has fueled many documentaries and theories as to what have happened to these 9 victims. Alrighty. This group, consisting of 8 men and 2 women, decided to make the most impossible expeditions to Mount Odorten in the northern region of the Ural Mountains in the autumn of 1959. The reason for making this journey has to do with the fact that each member was going to level up their hiking license, in a sense. So they were testing. Mm-hmm. And so they're going from intermediate to masters. And so this group was assembled and led by Igor Dyatlov, born in 1936. Igor loved to tinker and just kind of overall invent things. So he was an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. And this is where he met all of his peers who shared the same hobby of hiking. So because he liked to invent things and overall just kind of tinker, as I said before, he brought a stove on this journey because this journey was going to be so cold that they thought that it would keep them warm. Mm-hmm. So
it's a stove of his own creation then?
So, yeah, it's a stove of his own creation. He had tested it before back at the Institute, so he was confident enough in it that he could take it with them on this expedition. Mm-hmm. So this little group contained of, I believe it was 8 men, and 2 women, and one of them was the test proctor. One of the men was the test proctor that was testing them as it would happen. And they all brought cameras and they brought journals and diaries so they could kind of keep track of what happened via this test so they can look back at it later because this is what they normally did.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So they began their journey on the 25th of January, 1959 by train, arriving at a town named Ivdel, where is the centermost region of this northern region by the Ural Mountains. And so after that, they took a truck to Vizhai, which is the last town before you hit the mountains. So this would unfortunately be the last time they would see people. Okay. All right. And then there they stocked up on food and water and overall just kind of rested because the next day would be the most brutal of the days. They would make the most progress in hiking.
So it's like an outpost before the big
Yes, exactly. And so they also stocked up on food there because it's the freshest, so it won't go bad on their journey instead of packing it before. Mm-hmm. So they're resting and just overall relaxing, and yeah, that's what happened. Okay. So the next day, the 27th of January, this is when the hikers would say goodbye to civilization for the last time and begin their freezing journey towards Mount Odorten. It has a different name in Russian, but this was the English translation. Okay. And on the 28th, however, one of the hikers, Yuri Yurdin, he had some health ailments pertaining to his heart, his limbs, and I think overall just his blood pressure. Mm-hmm. And so after he decided that he was going to go home and just go back. And so before leaving, he did drop off all of his supplies and belongings so that the group could use them to their benefit. And then he left. He's gone. And on the 31st, the group hid their supplies on a highland sort of thing. They catched it like a tree. Mm-hmm. And they did this because on their way back down, because it was kind of like a quarter way point. Mm. So on their way back down the mountain, they would need more food because they ran out. Mm. So they would grab their food and their skiing because they left their skis there because they were actually going to start not hiking, but climbing, rock climbing.
So they don't need to carry all this stuff with them.
Yeah, they don't need to carry all of it. You should just leave it. So they put it up and prepared to climb. And so the original plan was, as the public knows, to climb up the pass and then set up camp the next night on the opposite side of the pass. So kind of
Gotcha.
move their way. And so, but ultimately they decided to not move to the other side and just stay a little like on the one side of the pass. They climbed and then just stayed there. And that was just because the snow was so terrible that they just wanted to stay put. So they pitched their tent near the peak of Kholat Syakhl, which is the name of the little peak that they were at.
Makes sense.
So before leaving, Dyatlov, the leader, promised Yurden that that those back at the Institute would receive a telegram by the 12th of February, indicating that they have safely made it to Vizhai, the town that was before the mountains,
Gotcha.
and that that they were safe and they were heading back. But if there was a little delay of some sort, they would not to be worried because, weather and just other external circumstances could have impacted their delay by a few days.
Yeah, it's 1959.
Yeah. And so you're not going to have every single minute tracked.
Yeah, of course.
So, but not to be worried. So the 12th of February came and went, and Yurden wasn't worried because he was told not to. So, and then for up to a week, Yurden became increasingly anxious, and until the 20th rolled around, then he kind of reached a breaking point and was like, where are they?
Yeah, it's a little past.
Little past. He gave a little wiggle room.
Yeah.
And he met a breaking point at the 20th where he contacted the families of those hikers and was like, hey, we need a search party. Because at this point, they didn't assume the worst. They just thought they were lost. They could have been trapped somewhere without a way to get back, So they wanted a search party for them. A rescue.
Yeah, 8 days without hearing from your family.
Yeah. And because they were experienced hikers, you think that they're going to be okay.
For them to have that kind of thing, there must be another level of worry.
Yeah, exactly. And so this search party consisted of the families. I don't believe Yurden went with them just because he had his ailment, so he couldn't go the first time. So why would he go again?
Exactly.
But so it was just the family of the hikers, and then as well as volunteer students at the Institute, but then later police would join. And so on February 26th, that is when the remains of the group's tent was found on that peak of the mountain, and all of the hikers' belongings were in there, including shoes, clothing, diaries, cameras, the stove, and their food that they needed for the next few days.
So they found all these supplies and no campers?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
It kind of just seems like they just disappeared.
Yeah.
And this was very odd because they seemed like they disappeared, but these belongings were deemed necessary for their travels.
Yeah. So even if they were going to do something else,
you need to grab those. You need shoes to walk in the snow.
Of course.
So no person in their sane mind would leave these belongings behind. And so this would indicate that a terrible and large event that would cause these hikers to flee into the wilderness, right?
I can imagine.
No. The footprints that were found leading from the tent were in a calm fashion. They were light enough so they weren't running. So they calmly walked.
Interesting.
Yeah, they calmly walked down the hill.
Without shoes or
Without
anything.
shoes. It doesn't make sense. It was just calm, straight lines.
Yeah.
The condition that the tent was found in raised very much question because it appeared that the tent, which was kind of ripped to shreds, it wasn't completely shredded, but you couldn't use it to protect yourself from the cold anymore.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it was cut from the inside out.
From the inside?
From the inside out. And it would indicate that they weren't hiding from something. They weren't fleeing from something. They were fleeing from something inside the tent.
Yeah, because if it's like a bear, you expect the slashes on the outside
Yeah,
or something.
Exactly. If it's an attacker, it's going to be on the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this was cut with a knife from the inside.
Interesting.
Yes. So about 1.5 or about, in American terms, almost a mile south of the tent, the footprints that led from the tent to the nearby forest. And then there they found an abnormally large Siberian pine tree. And underneath that was a bonfire. But what's interesting about this tree is that up to about 5 meters up, or 16 feet,
Jesus.
all the branches were torn off They were all torn off. And which is strange because normally with pine trees, the branches are all the way to the bottom.
Yeah.
So it's
even if you're
raises
getting,
some questions.
Getting some tinder or whatever, you're not going 16 feet up.
Yeah, you're not going 16 feet up.
Yeah.
And so it is believed that either some of the campers were climbing, or maybe they needed so much wood for their fire, or maybe to build like a makeshift like shelter.
Yeah.
That's what it could have been used for. But unfortunately, next to the fire, that is when they found the remains of 2 male hikers.
Jesus.
Yeah. And these 2 men were found in really perplexing conditions. Both were laying face down in the snow, almost completely nude, except for their undergarments.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's just brutal.
Yeah.
Especially if that's like your family that finds you. It's horrible. Yeah. But it was concluded that these 2 men did die from hypothermia, which probably could explain the lack of clothing in a way. But what's strange is that there were abrasions and scratches all up and down these men's arms, as well as one of them had burnt patches of hair.
Jeez.
And one of the men was also found with bits of knuckle flesh in between his front 2 teeth, which could have indicated a few things.
Yeah.
But it could have been, here's a few theories. He could have been trying to wake up his cold, unresponsive hands by biting it.
You get some blood in there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And another one could have been, which could have explained the branches, that he was trying to hold himself in the tree while biting his hand. Because sometimes if you can't get a good grip, you bite your hand. Or possibly it could have been him stifling a scream.
Oh, man.
Like if he was hiding something. But it was also concluded that these 2 bodies were moved after their death because signs of livor mortis presented the spots that correlated with lying in another position on your back.
Yeah, that's
so they were flipped over.
Yeah.
And then that same day that these 2 bodies were found, 3 more bodies were discovered. More towards the camp, though, so they missed them because they were covered in snow.
Interesting.
Yeah, but these 3 bodies were of 2 men and 1 woman, and then one of these men was Igor Dyatlov, the one who was heading the mission and brought the stove.
Yeah.
And so the poses and the directions that these bodies were found in indicated that they were walking back up to the tent. And that's when maybe an outlying force kind of struck them in a way. But these bodies were also found not only with abrasions all over their bodies, but also in each other's clothing.
Interesting.
So what proves this is that Dyatlov was wearing a shirt from that departed hiker, Yuri Yurden. But the thing is, Yurden gave his clothing to one of the guys found at the bonfire.
One of the first 2 guys.
Yeah, one of the first 2 guys, which would, one, indicate that maybe these hikers, those 2 men found, died first.
Yeah.
And to stay warm, these hikers took their clothing off just to stay warm because they were so cold.
Group took it off of the previous
people, yeah. So this also proves the timeline of which they died, which is sense. Very interesting. And a time of death, perhaps.
Yeah, go help.
So, and then the causes of these deaths to these 3 hikers were concluded to be hypothermia. But the interesting part is that the other 2 hikers found had seemingly died from a violent hypothermia, which would indicate that maybe they were struck unconscious.
Oh, wow.
And then they slowly froze to death involuntarily.
That sucks.
Yeah. And this could also be seen because there were ice surrounding their bodies, indicating that their bodies were still warm when an outlying force kind of changed the weather.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Interesting.
And so then it took a little more than 2 months to find the other hikers. On May 4th, the bodies of 1 woman and 2 men were found under 75 meters or 246 feet of snow in a ravine nearby to the south. And their bodies were found in really brutally mutilated conditions.
Oh my God!
With two of the body's eyes and tongues ripped out.
Jesus.
And then as well as abrasions all over each of their bodies.
Jeez.
And then broken ribs, and then exposed bones, and then just broken limbs. Just everything was just horribly mutilated.
Tongues
it's
and
horrific.
eyes is like.
It's really suspicious in a way, right?
Yeah.
And people like to theorize that maybe it was like an animal that ripped them out.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's so cold and they're under snow.
Yeah.
So
that's a crazy amount of snowfall.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of snowfall doesn't occur naturally.
Yeah, it's certainly not in that period of time.
Mm-mm. So the cause of deaths on one of the male bodies that was found, who had his eyes and tongue, was determined inconclusive because the injuries he sustained were particular to an unknown force throwing him, which would be similar to, like, perhaps a car hitting you. You're just being thrown with force.
But in the mountains.
Jesus. Yeah. And then the other two bodies that had no eyes were also found with lethal amounts of radiation on their clothing.
Radiation?
Radiation. That's what makes this case so interesting, is that there are so many factors that contribute to this that don't connect.
It's one thing to just have everyone kind of, not have a good hiking trip. Radiation.
Yeah, radiation in the mountains where all the people seemingly had died from different complication of natural substances, but having radiation on their clothing.
Yeah.
And these were like lethal amounts of radiation. So like one of the jacket that the woman was wearing, she had about 9,000 DPM or disintegrations per minute. And then when the lethal amount is 3,000.
Jesus, it's like triple.
Yeah, it's like triple. It's triple. And then the male corpse that was wearing a jacket and pants contained between the two garments ended up being around like 10,500 DPM.
Jesus.
But what's perplexing about this, is that no radiation traces were found in their stomachs or in their blood.
Yeah.
So that would indicate that that's not what killed them. It's not even in their body. So they must have been dead already when they had been exposed to this, because this was enough to have been exposed like while they were there, not previously.
Yeah.
And this clothing was taken also from the men at the campfire.
Yeah, so it's like another level of displacement.
Yeah, so it just doesn't make sense. And no radiation was found on those two men either.
That's extra weird. Then.
Yeah, then it's extra weird. It's extra weird, yeah. And so this could have not been their cause of death. So it had to be in contact with radiation after death, but how?
And even if it was, it doesn't sound like they had any radiation burns or anything.
No, exactly. Exactly. So even though the evidence suggests otherwise, the coroner did determine that their causes of death, like everybody's cause of death, was hypothermia, and then the manner of death was an unknown natural force.
An unknown
natural force, because there's not enough evidence to
suggest
suggest
that in the coroner's report. That's the phrasing?
Unknown natural force. Wow. That is the phrasing, yeah. It's really unfortunate because this case was left open for so long, and the families did not have answers to as why their brother, sister, or daughter, son had been just brutally killed.
Yeah, especially because it's like the height of the Cold War, and it adds all these other levels of
It's just very suspicious.
Corruption or whatever,
Yeah, and because this case was open for so long, there were so many theories detailing what people think could have happened. And some of these could be a little outlandish. Like, people speculate that a Yeti attack happened. This is what coined the Yeti in that kind of sense. Because, well, what it thinks is that the slash marks on the tent, for one. But for two, having that one male corpse being thrown.
Yeah.
It could subject Yeti, but also all the abrasions all over the face. Yeah. But they weren't lacerations.
Because it's not like one of these people is throwing the other people.
No,
like it's
exactly,
a
because no one's that strong. Exactly. Nobody can hurt. Because the male corpse that was found, he was particularly big. Like, he wasn't little, so being thrown by something wasn't human.
Yeah, so you need at minimum two people, and that sounds crazy in itself.
Exactly. Yeah. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
But so that's what could detail the Yeti. Yeah. But also people speculate that the Russian government did this.
So and if there's a time it would be then.
Yeah, exactly. During the Cold War. Yeah. They were testing. Well, people speculate that they were testing weapons nearby, and that maybe the hikers saw something that they shouldn't have.
Yeah, and that would add to the radiation factor or something.
Yeah. And what backs this theory up? It's a very popular theory. This can be backed up by a 3D rendering done in 2016 of a photo that was found on a camera in the ravine that kind of shows a figure being held down by the bonfire with another figure seemingly holding a gun or a musket.
Jesus.
Yeah. So this is not scientifically proven, but there was a rendering done
I
recently.
imagine the evidence also is going to be pretty problematic.
Exactly. Yeah, very problematic. But another one is the Manzi, which is like a local religious group nearby. People speculate that there was an attack of some sort.
Oh, interesting.
And this is because they found one of their like kind of, it's called a chum, but it's like a lean-to that's like nearby.
A little shelter type,
yeah. But here's the thing is that this religious group is not violent at all.
Yeah, so it'd be weird to have just now be the...
Yeah, exactly. They do hunt bears, but that's at a completely different time of the year. But they do worship bears and do have like a full like bear worship hunting festival.
Yeah, it's also pretty strange to have 9 people all be mistaken for bears.
No, exactly. So these are non-violent people. All of a sudden being targeted is just completely irrational and it doesn't make sense. And then another very, very popular theory, which I'm sure that you know and that everybody listening knows, is that the cause of this could have been an alien attack. An alien attack, yeah.
Why do you say alien attack?
I say alien attack because this is supported by the last photo that was also taken in the ravine that shows a glowing orb or some sort of light being emitted from a circular shape in the sky, which could indicate a UFO of some sort.
And I imagine, were there other sightings of this or?
Yeah, there's some photo evidence also on this camera that shows different glowing orbs or circular objects in the sky, because it is also speculated that the gentleman that owned the camera that was found in the ravine with him went out with his friend during the night before all of this went down to go take pictures in the sky. So that's
definitely
interesting. So there are a lot of photos of the sky around the time that this all took place. And a lot of them did show some sort of glowing thing in the sky. And so it does prove a solid theory, I do think. Personally, I don't believe it, but that's just me. That's just me. But so ultimately, this case was reopened in 2021 by the Russian government.
Oh, so recently then.
So very recently. And the authorities believe that the force that so gruesomely killed these people was a slab avalanche.
What does that mean?
So that's going to be kind of like how a flash flood is, where it's like a flash avalanche. And it's so quick and it's with ice that it could like instantly...
So instead of like a gradual whatever, it's just like all at once.
Yes, all at once. Like you do not have time to react.
Interesting. All right.
Yes. And this, interestingly enough, was determined by a Russian scientist while watching the Disney movie Frozen.
Frozen? The
Frozen with
movie?
like Let It Go and everything. And the film had a large team of meteorologists and scientists with specializations in the movement of snow and ice. And so that scientist did meet up with this team and figured out the patterns and how it moved and how everything was found. It made sense and it all lined up. So eventually the case was closed and determined that it was a slab avalanche that killed these tigers.
But how does that explain the radiation and everything?
It doesn't.
Yeah, so it feels like the case kind of is still open then.
It's still kind of open, and I mean, I do have some theories on how it happened, because I did lots of research and I've read a lot about this, and so I do have my own speculations. Do you want to hear it?
Let's hear them.
Okay. So I do believe that the avalanche conclusion was correct in a sense, but it still leaves lots of areas of the case unanswered relatively. And so this is what I think. So I think after a long day of hiking, the camp was set up at the highland of the Kolet cycle. And then everyone in the tent was unwinding around Dyatlov's stove, because this was a really particularly cold night. And so this was a source of warmth for them. So they were all kind of hanging out around there.
Interesting.
And then the 2 men leave to go look at the stars and take photos and also urinate, because their bladders were empty when they were found. And then during that time, the stove started to begin emitting smoke and then burning one of the men's heads. Not like fully, but in patches. And so while the tent filled up with smoke really, really fast.
It still did damage to that one guy.
Yeah.
Before he could get out in time,
Exactly. So then they start slitting holes in the tent very, very quickly and panicked. But unfortunately, it does kind of rip the tent apart, so they can't really stay there anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so all at once, they kind of walk down to the forest that's down the hill, and the two men outside join them, and they're all calmly kind of walking down there. They start a fire at once, just to keep warm because it's so cold and it's so snowy that they need to.
And the tent is all smoky. You couldn't go back.
Yeah,
to the
you
stuff,
couldn't go.
Which would explain why they didn't grab it.
Exactly. And so they're all walking as they were in the tent without their shoes and all this kind of stuff. And they immediately go and start a fire. But unfortunately, the two men that were found by the fire, who were not dressed how they needed to be, succumbed to the cold first.
That makes sense.
And so the remaining hikers decided that they were going to strip them and take their clothing so they could stay warm because they weren't decent. They needed to figure that out.
Point at that point,
yeah, exactly. So they stripped them of their clothing. They lay them on their stomachs so then they can't see their faces.
Yeah.
And so the two groups split up. They split up. Some of them, 3 of them, are going to go towards the tent and get their stuff because at that point the smoke had kind of gone, so they can safely grab their belongings and their food and all of their stuff so they could make a makeshift shelter.
Yeah.
And the other group who were southward, they were going to maybe find some more materials to make a shelter of some sort so then they could stay warm and block the wind.
That's fair.
Essentially. And so unknowingly, while the 3 were walking towards the tent, they triggered a slab avalanche of some sort. Oh. And so while it was coming down, it hit Igor first. It hit him first, and he immediately was done. Like, he was buried. And then the other 2, they were hit so hard that they fell unconscious and froze to death under the snow. And then while this avalanche was ramping up speed and momentum, essentially, it knocked the other 3 into the avalanche. And not into the avalanche, into the ravine. And so as they were falling down into the ravine, they hit their heads and their eyes fell out on rocks and stuff while they were going down. And one of the gentlemen that was found, he was thrown with so much force while going into the ravine. Yeah. Which could explain why he was thrown. Yeah. So instead of just falling.
So it's natural forces that knocked more of the avalanche itself.
Yes, exactly. And so while they were on the ground, the 2 people that were found with the radiation, they were found in a creek of some sort where water was being leaked onto them from an unknown source. So I believe that perhaps in the water, they were already dead. They were already dead when the water started leaking onto them. And so I believe that perhaps some sort of uranium or plutonium mine nearby, like a natural.
Yeah, it's the Cold War.
Exactly. So I believe that's what happened, essentially. And so they were buried. But, this case does remain relevant as it remained unsolved for so long, gaining a community as well as where they were able to come together and kind of speculate what happened for so long.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And until 2013, Yuri Yurden attended every single meeting that was...
So he has nothing to hide or whatever. It's not like it's
he has nothing to hide.
Plan.
No,
yeah.
He actually does believe that he should have died up on that mountain with them. And he does have a sense of survivor's guilt in that kind of sense.
Imagine.
Yeah.
So this is the story of Dyatlov Pass?
This is the story of Dyatlov Pass.
That was a really interesting episode.
I do agree. I think that it's so infamous and so kind of crazy in certain ways that it's just sad. But I'm glad that it has been solved in a sense, and people are able to have closure in that way. So, yeah. Thank you so much for listening, guys.
All right. We'll have to see what we do next time.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.